Hello, and welcome back to another light novel doujinshi reading from White Album 2. Today we're reading a short fan-made light novel called Tarot Woman. Checking out the cover, it is pretty cool because it does have Kazusa and Setsuna here as the Queen card. Interestingly, Setsuna is the Queen of Diamonds, while Kazusa on the bottom is the Queen of Clubs. A neat style design. I'm not entirely sure why they chose those symbols. I would definitely have to put some thought into that. But a question to keep in mind as we read through the novel itself. Tarot Woman, White Hairband. This is White Album 2 short story collection. Tarot Woman by White Hairband and Einshalt. Einshalt being the name of the author of the book, White Hairband being the circle. This work makes use of characters and settings from the game White Album 2 by Aquaplus and Leaf. Also, both of the stories included here serve as sequels to Setsuna's route in Coda and the mini after-story from the original game. So Einshalt is a huge Setsuna fan. If you've seen my other readings, you might have seen some other works by him. He's done a lot of light novels for Setsuna, like mad respect for the dedication here. So here we have yet another one. Contents: Birthday 1, 539M, compilation postscript. Cover illustration by Toya Ayase from Blue Garden. Cover design by Einshalt. Toya Ayase has done, to my knowledge, all of the covers for Einshalt. I have to check back to make sure, but at least most of them have been done by the same artist. So if you see a light novel of Setsuna, there's a pretty good chance it's going to be by these two, which I think is a pretty cool thing. So, starting off with Birthday 1. Birthday and Setsuna don't usually go together in a very happy sentence. May. About half a year had passed since Haruki and Setsuna had moved into their new home in the winter. June was not far off. Sorry to keep you waiting. Early afternoon on a weekday, when the sunlight shining in through the windows was almost too bright. A table for two in the back of a cafe that stood on a corner in the business district. As Haruki, in his button-up shirt and necktie and out of breath, gave his greeting, the one who had sat at loose ends while waiting for him to show up, Kazusa Toma, turned to look at him, her long hair fluttering. Was anybody expecting to see that name right now? No. You're late. Do you always make people wait when you call them somewhere? No, the meeting I was in ran long. Haruki quickly sat down in the seat across from her as he gave his excuse, but when he noticed the piercing glare aimed his way by the other party, he hastily shut his mouth and revised his words. I'm sorry. Honestly, you don't need an excuse for every little thing that happens. Sometimes just apologize and move on. Evidently, he had forgotten. Perhaps because it had been so long since he'd met her this way, that the standard explanations that would be understandable in his workplace would not pass here. Christ, ever since you turned into a grown-up, all you do is give excuses every time I see you. Dropping her shoulders and relaxing the severity of her eyes and expression, as though seeing Haruki acting so meek had satisfied her a little, Kazusa crossed her arms and changed her face to a sulk. This now, on top of the constant lecturing and the pushiness, you're just getting worse with age, huh? Scathing as usual, Kazusa. Until Haruki had spoken to her, she had probably sat looking perfectly unruffled. But the second he showed his face late, it was like a dam had burst, sounding a bit like his mother, or something actually. and he found something a little amusing in her rapid-fire criticisms. But if he let any flicker of that show through, it would just be throwing oil on the fire. So he kept his face stiff with an iron will. "You better pay for all the coffee I drank while I was waiting for you." And this is something in Japan that surprised me when I got here. Coffee is not usually bottomless. When I was in the States and I would go to, say, a diner or a family restaurant, you buy a coffee, it's unlimited. Like, pretty much everywhere. Not at places like Starbucks and fancier places and whatever, but regular cafes, always unlimited. Cafes in Japan? No, I don't think I've ever seen a bottomless coffee unless it was like a restaurant that had a drink bar and a salad bar kind of thing. No, you have to pay for every coffee. I was pretty surprised about that. Having strung together everything she had wanted to say, Kazusa once again crossed her arms. Haruki took a glance at the large mug sitting in front of her, with only a thin coffee-colored film left at the bottom. With a nod and a wry smile at the sight, her sudden focus switch to something tiny was just as it always had been. He replied, "Right, yeah." He got the feeling that all sorts of vitriol had been spat at him that he'd simply screamed out. But at this point, when he had skipped out of work, it didn't really matter what was said or how. "Anyway, we're short on time, so before I forget..." That said, he also wasn't exactly thrilled by how much was being spat at him, so he forestalled by speaking up before she could continue. He carefully withdrew a small paper bag from his satchel, sat it on the table, and pushed it to the center. "It's a bit early, but happy birthday, Kazusa." Thanks." Her tone of voice and expression changed slightly in response to Haruki's polite greeting. She took the bag, blinking, evidently somewhat surprised. It's so funny because this is definitely... Einshalt always does Setsuna books, so 100% I'm sure of the fans that picked up this book and then immediately read Happy Birthday Kazusa are going to be like, what? It's so funny. It's so out of character. Not out of character, like this is definitely something Haruki would still do for Kazusa post Setsuna route, but like it's still funny. It's interesting. Since he'd told her he had something to give her today, it must have been well within the realm of her prediction that he might give her a present. But she looked happy anyhow. From the bag, Kazusa pulled out a small, carefully wrapped box. She turned it around, gazing at it, perhaps because it was heavier than it looked, then turned her eyes to Haruki with a strange expression. "Can I open it?" "Of course." With no reason whatsoever to say otherwise, Haruki immediately nodded. "And just to be clear, Setsuna and I picked it out together," he added, watching as Kazusa picked at the package with its high-end brand logo. And as he had appended it just to be clear, Haruki himself realized that what he had said was probably unnecessary. But for some reason he couldn't help saying it. To himself, primarily. What an awkward addition. Like, it is necessary to continue to draw that boundary with the history the three of them share. If nothing had ever happened in the past, that would be a little like, really? Why do you have to say that? But given what had happened in the past, I am kind of proud of him for really just making it extra clear. It does need to be said sometimes. I don't care how long it's been. You need to continue drawing that line in the sand and saying, okay, here's where I stand, here's where we stand. Maintaining a healthy friendship. That is important. With her eyes dropped to her hands, continuing carefully unwrapping the package, Kazusa threw a single upturned glance at Haruki. "I know that. You don't have to tell me." Haruki, seeing her reaction and feeling a bit as though a nail had been driven into him by implication, swallowed the impulse to say, "All right, good," and simply nodded. Huh. That is kind of awkward, though. Taking no notice of Haruki's strange, ambiguous mood, Kazusa opened the small box and made a sound of wonder. Coiled in the box was a woman's thin leather belt with a gleaming silver buckle. Though its design was simple, it had an air of class that was immediately noticeable, and it was easy to imagine that kind of price tag that must have been on it. Funny. Funny? I think that's pretty fitting for her. Also, that's a nice gift to get. Who's gonna turn their nose up at a belt? Belts are awesome. Belts are the kind of thing, I don't know, we don't really think about. I myself, I only own one belt. It'd be awesome if someone gifted me a belt, because then I'd have more to go with my outfits. But it's not the kind of thing I would go out and buy myself. So, good gift idea to keep in mind if you're listening to this. Not for me, I mean for anyone. Having taken it out, Kazusa once again turned it around in her hands, looking at it from almost all sides. Oh, from all sides. Huh. At her unexpected utterance, Haruki forgot his odd mood and reacted in an almost hysterical voice. He hadn't exactly been aiming for a laugh or trying to make a joke. What on earth could she mean? Now, faced with Haruki's own curious reaction, Kazusa smiled somewhat teasingly. "Oh, nothing. I was just imagining what kind of outfit you and Setsuna must have been thinking of when you bought this." Huh? Ah. A small vocal reaction slipped out of him at her remark. The sort of clothing the leather belt with a silver buckle would go with? Well, really, this sort of thing she was wearing right now. It probably wouldn't be too far from those lines. Of course, I'm not about to suggest that something frilly and cute would work on me. Even I know that. What a weird reaction to a gift. Like, you get a gift, just say thank you. Be done with it. Don't laugh at it and be like, "What were you guys thinking?" That's kind of rude. Unsure of whether he should nod in agreement at this, Haruki abruptly silenced himself. He still wasn't completely up on the grammar, or rather, the etiquette, when it came to appraising women's fashion. I mean, that would work for Setsuna, right? So weird and awkward. I don't like this. Why do you have to be like, "Oh, sorry, I'm not girly. Sorry, frilly things don't work for me." Like, literally, it's just a fashionable belt. Just accept it. Don't compare yourself to Setsuna. This does not seem like a very healthy way to be reacting to a present at this stage of the love triangle, I guess. Kazusa couldn't have guessed that Haruki was having trouble finding what to say. But the moment her words entered his ears, his eyes snapped to her face. Well, His face turned serious as he made an earnest attempt to picture it. But nothing exactly right came to mind, and he had to tilt his head. He couldn't really recall having seen Setsuna wearing that kind of thing all that many times. Granted, with her fundamental outstanding loveliness, just about anything would suit her, but come on, I just handed you the perfect opportunity to gush about your girl. You're so dense. A word that had happened to float through his head pushed its way out of his throat in an exasperated voice. Had he actually taken the bait and gushed about Setsuna? One of two things would probably have happened. Either she would have turned sullen, or else a very chilly gaze would have been sent his way. Or what? Are you going to say she's not the right age to wear that kind of thing anymore? No, I don't even remotely think that. This time she had perfectly pinpointed what was in his mind, and he was panicking inwardly, even as he denied it aloud. What do you mean not the right age? You should be able to wear anything you want, no matter what age you are. Especially considering they didn't mention a huge time jump after post-Setsuna coda route, so presumably they're still in their 20s, or at the most, early 30s. And at those ages, seriously, just wear whatever the heck you want. Don't think so much about what other people think. Other people shouldn't even be thinking badly of it. He hoped he had managed to disguise it well enough, but he wasn't especially confident. Why was this happening again? Why did she have to be so brutally sharp sometimes? Or maybe he was just easy to read. Though he'd never had that image of himself. Trust me, Haruki, you're very easy to read. Suspicious. I'm telling Setsuna. Whoa, no, hang on. Seeing Kazusa pull the phone out of her bag, Haruki ceased to disguise his panic, reaching out his hand to stop her. And Kazusa, with a rare smirk at his reaction, shut her phone with a snap. It had all been a bluff. I'm kidding. Calm down. You are so... When had she learned to toy with people like this? Since forever, this is definitely Kazusa's personality archetype. She already had a grasp of his weaknesses. Well, that might be a misleading way of wording it, but she was one of the very few people who were aware that Haruki could not take too strong a front against them. And he had a small inkling that a new potential source of worry had been added to his list. Thank you, though. Seriously. Tell Setsuna I said thank you, too. Now that Haruki was lost in his own anxiety, Kazusa, seemingly satisfied after her interlude of messing with him, returned her expression and manner to that of a short while before, and once again began examining her present with keen interest. It was as though she had simply snipped out the preceding few moments entirely and joined the dangling ends together. Haruki, unable to follow along with her sudden shift, only barely managed to reply, Yeah, of course. Kazusa's very socially awkward. Like, even though she's growing up and she's able to read situations better and whatever, she's still... Things like this. It's like a social faux pas. Like, you don't sit there and make fun of people and make people panic and give them anxiety and then suddenly go back and be like, it's fine. Like, I don't want to criticize on other people's characterizations and whatever, but I feel like at this point in the story, Kazusa should be a little more mature. I feel like in this story, she definitely showed more maturity than this, but I guess that's just my opinion. I think this is being a little harsh on Kazusa. She had really managed to keep the upper hand this entire time. It was that kind of day, apparently. Actually, to tell you the truth, Haruki said, after taking a moment to collect himself, I'd wanted to have everyone get together to celebrate, but every date I looked at, someone or another already had plans. Kazusa turned to look at him with a small utterance. Yes, now that they'd all been full working members of society for a few years, even a simple weekend was almost impossible to pin down. All the more so to find a day that worked for everyone in a group of 5 or 6 people. This is so unfortunately true. Once you're an adult, once you're out of university, finding a day that works for a bunch of people is really hard. Even so, when it came to the usual suspects, Takeya and Io, something could generally be worked out. But throw a non-standard product, Kazusa, into the mix, and things got difficult again. Well, I'm not going to be in Japan the day of anyway. A certain someone decided to put me on a tour that includes my birthday. Which, from a standpoint of a manager, is not a bad idea. You know, throw a concert on your birthday and then fans pour in, oh, happy birthday, oh, you're amazing. Birthday concert. That's a good moneymaker. Running one fingertip around the rim of her coffee cup, she looked off in another direction, her expression suddenly sullen. So Yoko-san was the one who the one who suggested that? Haruki watched the side of her face, recalling the tour pamphlet he had laid eyes upon the other day, which included a performance bearing the extremely obvious designation of birthday concert. To be fair, birthday concert would only be a good idea if the birthday girl is in agreement with it. If she's not, that just sucks. That just means she has to work on her birthday. If she wants to and she wants that recognition, great. Kazusa turned only her eyes to him, her expression and the direction she faced remaining the same, and replied, "Who the hell else would have come up with a money-grubbing maneuver like that?" A strange smile flickered at the corner of Haruki's lips. Of course. That, even with the serious illness ravaging her body, her shrewdness when it came to her own daughter should not have weakened in the slightest. Was this woman to a T. And this reaction, the appearance of displeasure, but with a hint of pride that could not entirely be hidden, whenever it came to this mother of hers, was Kazusa to a T. Kazusa being proud of her mom for still pushing so hard is adorable. Well, we'll make something work next month. Everyone wants to see you. You don't think they're more interested in Setsuna or Yanagihara than me? No, listen. Every time we meet up, everyone asks how you're doing. Every single time. In response to Haruki's deliberate repetitions for emphasis, Kazusa simply nodded and answered briefly. Having been certain that some manner of cynical jab would have been returned to him, something like, so, Haruki found himself betrayed, in the best way possible, by Kazusa's reaction, and mentally apologized to her for assuming the worst. To be fair, his assumption was something that Kazusa would say. Being too unhumble is a huge character flaw. If someone tells you a compliment, learn how to accept it. That is a huge part of becoming an adult, or a mature adult, I should say. Yes, it's embarrassing when people compliment you. Yes, it's embarrassing to be like, oh, they wanted to see you. They love you. Don't even worry. Don't have anxiety about it. Yeah, it's embarrassing. But just smile and take the compliment and be like, thanks. And then other people around you will feel more comfortable too. So, after pouring 3 heaping tablespoons of sugar into the coffee refill the waitress had just brought, Kazusa brought it to her lips, her face appearing to stay the same. But now, as she held the cup in both hands, though no one from the outside would be able to see, Haruki could tell that she was now looking somewhere far away. I'll get in touch as soon as I come up with a date that works for everyone. I'm sure that a single day should be manageable once we get into next month. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks. Half-hearted though her reply was, Haruki found something charming about the sight and felt his lips relaxing into a smile. The way that, whenever she seemed happy, she would so blatantly feign indifference. Well, blatantly to Haruki or Setsuna maybe, was also wholly unchanged from the past. It is cute. She is not the type to wear her smiles on her sleeve. So, I assume Setsuna's doing well? There wouldn't really have been anything to gain in talking to Kazusa about his work at Kaio. In fact, she probably would have seen it as him arrogantly going on and on about things she didn't understand. Something which had turned her mood sour toward him sour in the past. So in fact, it would have had a pointedly negative effect. Apart from that, they did at least have music at a common point, but Haruki had yet to surpass the limits of a novice in his musical understanding, and thus would not have been able to hold up his own end of the conversation. And this is a shame, because you should be able to talk about your job without having to use so many technical terms and just kind of enjoy the conversation of two friends sharing experiences. All of that being the case, their talk naturally moved to the person who was most dear to them both. Yes, nothing's changed there. Things have settled down for her recently. She actually just went back to her parents' place this week, so I've only been talking to her on the phone, but... What? Did you do something again? No, there's just a lot of preparing to do. Childbirth, you know. Haruki replied, half groaning, suppressing every impulse he had to shoot back at Kazusa's again. Well, you deserve the again. Just saying. Although coming from Kazusa, I don't know if he deserves the again. At no point in his life could he recall having done anything to warrant an again, with the sole exception of that which had happened between him and the woman sitting across from him. What an oxymoronical sentence. Perhaps. As he watched her, Kazusa muttered a brief, "Okay," then appeared to be pondering something before shutting her mouth altogether. Years before, well, previously, anyhow, he had a feeling there would have been a tiny bit more of a reaction, like he'd carelessly stuck his hand out and gotten snapped at. Whatever face she might make, he felt like there would be a bit more something. Feeling almost a little let down, or a tinge of emptiness at her response, Haruki too shut his mouth, gazing at her over his coffee cup. Actually, he understood well enough that his thinking this way was, in a sense, selfishness on his part. And more than that, he understood that this calming down, in and of itself, was a demonstration of having grown and matured. Still, he almost missed the days when attempts to address her would be met with one of three responses: being ignored, glared at, or sent flying with a kick. Although, to be fair, those are very immature responses, and thank God Kazusa has grown a little bit. Yes, so long ago, and, he considered, the two of them had aged enough that those days could be called long ago. All of those memories flashed through the back of his mind, and he narrowed his eyes, getting lost in deep emotions for a short while. It could be that this sense of not quite right he was feeling regarding Kazusa's reaction in this moment was the result of his unconsciously projecting her past self onto her current self. Those present here in this cafe were both years away from that by now. Man, you're gonna be somebody's parent, huh? As Haruki was absorbing himself in recollection of the old days, finding himself filled with an emotion he couldn't describe, he suddenly noticed that the lady herself was there, looking at him with an impish smile. Or maybe it would be better described as sarcastic, even mean-spirited, on her face. People make bitter jokes about how you can pick your friends, but not your family, but this must be exactly what they're talking about. This came before he could aim an indignant "what?" at her expression, and she followed it with a smug grin. The words, "Oh, you're one to talk," leapt immediately into his head, but he knew it would only serve to reopen his old wounds, so he kept it inside and darted his gaze around, trying to escape his eyes as he searched for a response. "I don't love hearing that from you, honestly." And yet his endurance failed him, and before he realized it, he was voicing the feeling anyway. Proof, maybe, that he hadn't entirely become an adult, since he couldn't grit his teeth through something like that. It's all the more meaningful coming from me. I don't think it's necessarily adult-like to swallow all your feelings down, especially if your friend is saying things that hurts you. No, you absolutely have the right to tell them, hey, I don't like that. I don't like what you just said, and I wish you would stop and not say that again in the future. That's maturity. Now, if it's just a playful quip, and you're like, you know what, it's not worth the argument, that's maturity. But burying your feelings, which unfortunately, especially for guys, is portrayed as like the thing to do, no, don't do that. That's not healthy. That leads to misunderstandings. It's not a good thing in general. So, before we continue on, I think this is a good stopping place for the story. So thank you so much for joining me on this light novel doujinshi reading from White Album 2, and I'll pick it up with part 2 shortly. So until then, hope you take care. See you!